Before we begin, every story you're about to hear, every detail, every name, and every account has been meticulously researched from verified historical sources, survivor testimonies, military archives, and documented records. This is not dramatization. This is history, drawn from the voices of those who were there and the evidence they left behind. Now, let us journey beyond the famous photograph, beyond the textbooks, into the darkness beneath Iwo Jima. Enjoy. February 19th, 1945. The date burns itself into the pages of history. But this isn't the story you've heard before. This isn't about the famous flag raising atop Mount Suribachi, frozen forever in Joe Rosenthal's iconic photograph. This is about what lies beneath, about the miles of tunnels carved into volcanic stone, about the gear left behind in darkness, about the men who vanished into the earth, and the stories that echo still in chambers 20 meters below the surface. This is the story beyond the bunkers of Iwo Jima. The underground fortress. 8 square miles. That's all Iwo Jima was. A speck of volcanic rock in the vast Pacific, shaped like a pork chop, dominated by the 550-foot sentinel of Mount Suribachi to the south. But what the American forces couldn't see from their ships would cost them dearly. What they couldn't see would turn this tiny island into the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. Beneath their feet, an entire world waited. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi arrived on Iwo Jima in May 1944 with orders from General Hideki Tojo himself. Only you among all the generals are qualified and capable of holding this post, Tojo told him. Kuribayashi, a descendant of samurai warriors with 3 decades of military experience, understood what those words meant. He wasn't sent to win. He was sent to make the Americans pay in blood for every inch of volcanic ash. And so the digging began. 25% of the garrison, 1 in every 4 men, was detailed to tunneling. Mining engineers arrived from Japan with blueprints for an underground fortress unlike anything the Pacific War had seen. While the Japanese at Peleliu had turned the improvement of natural caves into an art, Kuribayashi transformed it into a science. The men worked in temperatures that climbed from 30 to 50 degrees Celsius. Sulfur fumes choked their lungs, forcing them to wear gas masks. In many places, workers could only dig for 5 minutes before they had to be relieved. The volcanic stone was fortunate in one respect. It was soft enough to cut with hand tools, but it came at a price. Every breath burned. Every minute underground was agony. They dug anyway. By the time the Marines landed, 11 miles of tunnels honeycombed the island. 11 miles. But Kuribayashi's vision called for 17 miles total, a network that would link every major defensive position on Iwo Jima, from Mount Suribachi in the south to Kitano Point in the north. Had it been completed, the Americans would have faced something unprecedented, an island where the enemy could disappear. The main communications center south of Kita village was a marvel of military engineering. One chamber alone measured 50 meters long and 20 meters wide, spacious enough to hold hundreds of men. Tunnels 20 meters below ground led into this vast subterranean chamber. Gasoline-powered generators provided electricity for radios and lighting. Concrete reinforced the walls.
Multiple entrances and exits ensured that men wouldn't be trapped if one passage was blocked. General Kuribayashi established his command post in the northern part of the island, about 500 meters northeast of Kita village. 20 meters below ground, he had his own war room, one of 3 small concrete enclosed chambers connected by 150 meters of tunnels. Here, protected from American naval bombardment and aerial attacks, he would orchestrate his defense. On Hill 382, the second highest elevation on the island, Japanese engineers constructed a radio and weather station. Nearby, an enormous blockhouse served as headquarters for Colonel Chosaku Kaido, who commanded all artillery on Iwo Jima. Mount Suribachi alone harbored several thousand yards of tunnels. The underground installations ranged from small caves holding a few men to chambers capable of housing 300 to 400 soldiers. Stairways connected different levels. Interconnecting passageways ensured that forces could reinforce any position under attack. Special attention was paid to ventilation, not just for comfort, but for survival. Above ground, the Japanese constructed 800 pillboxes and 730 major defense installations. They positioned 120 guns larger than 75 millimeters, 130 howitzers, 90 large mortars and rocket launchers, 16 anti-tank guns, 220 millimeter machine guns, and 24 tanks. But here was the key. All installations and weapons armories were connected by the tunnel system. Kuribayashi engineered his defenses so that every part of Iwo Jima was subject to Japanese defensive fire. Artillery positions on Mount Suribachi had reinforced steel doors that would open to fire, then close immediately to prevent counterfire. Most bunkers connected to the elaborate tunnel system. When Americans cleared a position with flamethrowers and grenades, Japanese troops would simply move through the tunnels and reoccupy it. Marines walked past bunkers they thought were secure, only to take fresh fire from positions they'd already cleared. 21,000 Japanese soldiers waited underground. They had food for 4 months. They had ammunition, though only 60% of what was normally considered sufficient. They had no illusions about survival. Kuribayashi had ordered them to kill 10 Americans each before they died. But they also had something else. They had their personal effects, their letters from home, their photographs, their helmets and canteens and sake bottles, their weapons and tools, all the small pieces of human existence that men carry into battle. Much of it would stay there forever, buried in darkness. The surface hell and the underground nightmare. The bombardment began 3 days before the landing. American ships pounded Iwo Jima with more ordnance than had been expended on any other target of comparable size in the Pacific War. The island disappeared under clouds of smoke and volcanic dust. Surely nothing could survive such devastation. But on February 19th, 1945, at 08:59, the first waves of Marines hit the black volcanic sand beaches. 30,000 men in the initial assault. They expected resistance. They'd been told this would be quick, maybe 7 days. Private James Blaine, a rifleman with the 4th Marine Division, remembered what his leaders said. "Don't worry about it. You'll only be there about 7 days." For about an hour, the landing proceeded with surprisingly light resistance. Marines gathered on the beach, organizing for the push inland. The black volcanic sand made movement difficult. Amtraks couldn't gain traction. Men sank ankle-deep with every step. Then Kuribayashi sprang his trap. From concealed positions in the heights of Mount Suribachi and from hills to the north, Japanese artillery opened fire. Machine guns raked the beaches. Mortars dropped from the sky. Private Jim Naughton of the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division, recalled the approach. Nobody talked.
What was ahead was a carefully orchestrated killing field. The Japanese had months to measure ranges, set sights, and coordinate overlapping fields of fire. Spider holes and hidden positions dotted the landscape. Snipers could appear, fire, disappear into tunnels, and emerge elsewhere to fire again. The tunnels allowed for rapid reinforcement of any threatened position. Corporal Donald Rash dragged his body up the obsidian sheet of sand speckled with other waterlogged Marines. He clambered over the peak of an incline, only to find one of his comrades was missing something: his head. The Marines pushed forward anyway, because that's what Marines do. But this battle would require something special, something that struck fear into Japanese defenders and Marine operators alike. Something with an average life expectancy of 5 minutes on the battlefield. The Flamethrower. The Flamethrower Men. The tanks on a Marine's back weighed 70 pounds. 2 containers held the flammable liquid, a mixture of diesel fuel and high-octane aviation gas. A 3rd tank contained compressed air to force the liquid out. The nozzle contained a barrel with phosphorus matches that ignited the stream as it emerged. The tanks were virtually bulletproof. The men carrying them were not. Herschel Woody Williams was a farm boy from West Virginia, just 5 feet 6 inches tall. On Guadalcanal in early 1944, he and some other Marines received crates of flamethrowers that they had to figure out how to operate. There were no manuals, no training protocols. We had to learn that ourselves, Williams said. By the time he came ashore on Iwo Jima, Williams supervised 6 other flamethrower and demolition men in his special weapons unit. 4 days into the battle, on February 23, 1945, the same day the flag was raised on Suribachi, Williams and his Marines became pinned down. Conventional weapons had failed. Tanks couldn't advance. The Marines were being mowed down. A superior officer turned to Williams. "Try the flamethrower." Williams selected 4 Marines to provide cover fire. 2 of them wouldn't survive. He strapped the 70-pound weapon to his back and began crawling toward the Japanese pillboxes. "I can remember bullets ricocheting off my air tank," Williams recalled, "and I don't know why I was smart enough to figure out that if I crawled closer, they couldn't get me." What happened next, Williams doesn't fully remember. "Fear," he said, "puts you in automatic drive." Much of those 4 hours is lost to him, but the records tell the story. He crawled toward one pillbox where he could see the barrel of a Japanese machine gun protruding from a slit. Bullets ricocheted off his flamethrower tanks. He got within 20 to 25 yards and rolled a big ball of flame at the enemy gunner. Silence. He crawled toward another pillbox. A wisp of smoke escaped from a ventilation hole in the top. He crept up, stuck the nozzle of the flamethrower into the vent, and fired. "Got 'em all," he said quietly. Over 4 hours, Williams returned to his own lines 5 times for fresh weapons. 5 times he went back into hell. He destroyed Japanese positions that had held up the Marine advance for days. He killed enemy soldiers who tried to bayonet him. He survived when all the other members of his flamethrower demolition unit had been killed or wounded. To say I wasn't scared would be the biggest lie that's ever been told.
Williams told reporters years later. Captain Frank C. But the flame tanks, 8 M4A3 Shermans equipped with the Navy Mark I flamethrower, nicknamed Zippos, weren't enough. The battle required men on foot, crawling through volcanic rock and ash, getting close enough to burn the enemy out of positions impervious to artillery and aerial bombardment. Don Graves was a flamethrower operator with the 2nd Battalion.
"I'm the only flamethrower in the 2nd Battalion that came off Iwo Jima," he said. On that beach, pinned down with nowhere to go, Graves made a promise. He kept that promise. 32 years in the ministry. The Cavemen. March 26, 1945. The island was declared secure. The flag flew over Mount Suribachi. The Marines began withdrawing, bloodied and exhausted. Nearly 7,000 Americans had died. More than 19,000 had been wounded. It was the only battle in World War II where American casualties exceeded Japanese losses. But the battle wasn't over. General Harry Schmidt, commander of the Marines' V Amphibious Corps, estimated that probably 100 to 300 surviving Japanese soldiers remained underground, ready to continue resisting. His estimate was off by a factor of 10. An estimated 3,000 Japanese troops refused to surrender. They retreated into the warren of tunnels that honeycombed the island, and someone had to go get them.
Enter the 147th Infantry Regiment of the United States Army. They would call themselves the Cavemen of Iwo Jima. More than 2 decades before the famous tunnel rats of Vietnam, these soldiers descended into darkness with flashlights and pistols to hunt an enemy that had nowhere left to run but also refused to surrender. The labyrinth contained over 1,500 rooms, countless places to hide, endless opportunities for ambush. "We were equipped with guts, flashlights, and pistols," remembered James McGuire of Bravo Company. James Ahern, a platoon leader in Fox Company, described the Japanese defenders as courageous and clever. Openings were often defended by marksmen who could pick off soldiers at a distance. If someone got close enough to throw a grenade, the enemy often had another man ready to catch it and throw it back. McGuire was twice wounded by this tactic when attacking the same cave. He threw in a phosphorus grenade. It came flying back at him. Colonel Johnson, commanding the 147th, developed tactics specifically for underground warfare. Combat patrols engaged the enemy. Carefully planned ambushes used pre-sighted kill zones. Cave clearing teams went into the enemy's tunnels and fought it out face to face. On April 4, 1945, the Marines left Iwo Jima entirely. Responsibility for the island fell to the 147th. By the end of March, official figures reported that they'd killed 387 Japanese soldiers and captured 17. Their own losses, 8 dead, 53 wounded. But the Japanese weren't finished. In early April, a task force of approximately 200 Japanese soldiers emerged from underground near East Boat Basin, about halfway up the southeast coast. They attacked a command post. The firefight lasted. Then Zaki and Kufuku wandered around the base for hours until a passing American sergeant realized they were Japanese and took them in. Nearly 4 years after the battle ended, nearly 4 years of living underground, stealing supplies, surviving in darkness. When Americans entered their hideout, they found it richly stocked with canned foods, flashlights, batteries, uniforms, boots, shoes, socks, sundry goods pilfered over the years, everything needed to survive underground indefinitely. They were the last Japanese holdouts on Iwo Jima. But their story raises haunting questions. How many other soldiers died in those tunnels? Their bodies never recovered.
How many sealed passages contain the remains of men who simply couldn't find a way out? The artifacts of darkness. Today, Iwo Jima, returned to Japanese control in 1968, remains largely off-limits. Special permission from the Japanese government is required to visit. The island houses a Japanese Self-Defense Forces base. The caves and tunnels are considered tombs, and rightly so. But those who have been granted access describe a landscape frozen in time, a time capsule of February and March 1945. The black volcanic sand still surrenders artifacts when disturbed. Spent cartridge cases by the handful, shrapnel, bullets, grenades, Japanese and American gear scattered across the island, slowly being reclaimed by volcanic soil and tropical weather. In the tunnels themselves, those that remain accessible, the detritus of war endures. Rusted rifles lean against stone walls. Helmets, their fabric covers rotted away, rest where they were last placed. Canteens, still bearing the stains of whatever liquid they last contained. Sake bottles, some left by soldiers during the battle, others left more recently by Japanese visitors as offerings to the dead. The Japanese have a tradition. They leave bottles of water in the caves as offerings to the fallen soldiers who died of dehydration. They leave food for men who starved in darkness 70 years ago. It's a gesture of respect, of remembrance, of acknowledging that these tunnels are more than historical sites. They're graves. Blood-stained Japanese helmets have been recovered and donated to museums, complete with documentation of where they were found and what they represent. American gear too, M1 carbines, flamethrower packs, combat webbing, all slowly deteriorating in the salt air and volcanic environment. Private Toshiki Kawasaki was born in Nagasaki on July 2, 1920. After military service, he found employment working the night shift at a Mitsubishi shipyard near his parents' home. His civilian career ended when he was recalled to active duty on June 18, 1944. He was immediately sent to Iwo Jima with the 86th Field Artillery Regiment, assigned to a 150mm mortar team. S. Marine. It surfaced in 2004 at a flea market in San Diego, purchased by a British Royal Navy veteran who recognized its significance. Through the efforts of Pacific War historians, the booklet was eventually returned to Kawasaki's younger brother in Japan. He was deeply moved at the gesture of friendship, the brother said. How many more such artifacts remain in the tunnels? How many letters from home, carried into battle, still rest in the pockets of uniforms worn by men whose bones lie in darkness? How many photographs of wives and children and parents remain sealed in the earth? The caves themselves tell stories. Steel doors still hang on massive hinges, their reinforced construction a testament to Japanese engineering. Artillery pieces, their barrels pointed at angles that once commanded the beaches, rust in place. Command centers with their communication equipment sit silent, frozen in the moment when the last operator abandoned his post. Some tunnels have collapsed. Others remain intact, their walls still bearing the marks of the hand tools that carved them. The air inside is thick with history, and, in many places, still tainted with sulfur fumes from the volcanic activity that continues beneath the island. Americans are not permitted to disturb these sites. The Japanese government has declared many areas strictly off-limits, both out of respect for the dead and because of the very real danger of unexploded ordnance. Booby traps set 80 years ago may still be functional. Mines remain buried. The best approach, most agree, is to leave things where they are until they must be disturbed, and to respect the caves as the tombs they are. But on special occasions, commemorations of the battle, reunions of survivors, official visits, small groups are allowed to walk the black sand beaches and peer into the mouths of caves where so much blood was spilled. Marine veteran Raymond Hart returned for the 75th anniversary in 2020. He brought with him his helmet, the one with 2 holes above the front brim, where a Japanese sniper's bullet had entered and exited on the second day of the invasion. The bullet had creased his temple as it passed through, knocking him back but not down. It was like a big explosion going off inside my helmet, Hart remembered. But he remained with his unit through the entire 36-day battle, and he brought back his helmet as a reminder of how close death came, how thin the line between survival and oblivion. Joseph Caminiti was assigned to an amphibious tractor, responsible for bringing troops and supplies from landing craft to shore. As the battle continued, he transported wounded back to the ships. He stood on the airfield closest to Mount Suribachi when he witnessed both flag raisings on the 4th day of battle. "We never thought it was going to be a historical thing," Caminiti recalled. "The first time, you couldn't really see it. They called for a bigger flag. I saw the bigger flag go up." Now both Hart and Caminiti, both over 100 years old, speak at commemorations. They tell their stories because so many of their friends cannot, because the history must not be forgotten.
"So many of my friends are gone, and they're not around to tell stories," said James Blaine, another centenarian veteran. Voices from the other side. For decades, American accounts dominated the narrative of Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps legend, the iconic photograph, the Medal of Honor recipients, the memorials and monuments. But what of the Japanese defenders? What of their stories? Pacific War historian Dan King has spent 25 years studying the battle from both perspectives. He's interviewed 98 Japanese Army and Navy veterans of World War II. He's visited Iwo Jima multiple times, walking the ground where men on both sides fought and died. The Japanese soldiers who survived, those evacuated before the Marines landed, or the handful taken as prisoners of war, carried their own scars, their own memories of those underground fortresses where they awaited their deaths. They speak of the heat, of the suffocating air in tunnels deep beneath the surface, of the constant fear that American explosives would seal them in forever, of the knowledge that they were expected to die, not just to fight bravely, but to deliberately die, taking as many Americans with them as possible. They speak of General Kuribayashi's orders: kill 10 Americans each, make the enemy pay for every yard of ground, fight from the tunnels, abandon the traditional banzai charges that had led to slaughter on other islands. This would be a new kind of battle, a battle of attrition, a battle where both sides would bleed until one could bleed no more. Some Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima wrote letters home, though most knew the letters would never be delivered. He knew his fate. He knew his men's fate, but duty required that he continue. The last confirmed Japanese soldier on Iwo Jima, beyond the 1949 holdouts, died alone in darkness sometime between the battle's end and the discovery of skeletal remains years later. We don't know his name. We don't know his story. We know only that he crawled into a tunnel and never emerged. The Japanese remember their dead. Each year, groups organize trips to Pacific Islands to search for remains of soldiers killed during the war. In 2011, volunteers handed over the ashes of more than 100 Japanese soldiers from Guadalcanal to the Ministry of Health and Welfare. Similar efforts continue on other islands. But Iwo Jima's tunnels hold their secrets closely. The danger is too great, the caves too numerous, the respect for the dead too profound to disturb what remains. So the artifacts stay: the rusted rifles and rotted uniforms, the helmets and canteens and sake bottles, the letters never delivered, the photographs never seen again by the families who sent them. They rest in darkness, 20 meters below the surface of an island that cost so much blood to take and so much blood to defend. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions on Iwo Jima. Only 6 of those recipients survived the battle to receive them in person. But valor wasn't limited to Americans. The Japanese defenders fought with a determination that bordered on the supernatural. Outnumbered, outgunned, cut off from supply and reinforcement, they held out for 36 days. Not because they could win. They knew they couldn't win, but because they believed it was their duty. Herschel Woody Williams, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Pacific War, spoke the simple truth before he passed away in 2022. It's not possible to describe the hell of Iwo Jima. Today, Iwo Jima sits largely silent. The roar of artillery has faded.
the screams of dying men have been absorbed by volcanic rock. The Japanese self-defense forces maintain a presence. Small commemorative ceremonies occur on anniversaries of the battle, but mostly, the island belongs to the ghosts.
Beneath the surface, in those 11 miles of tunnels carved by hand through volcanic stone, the artifacts remain. Silent witnesses to courage and fear, to determination and desperation, to the stubborn refusal of human beings to surrender, even when surrender was the only rational choice. The flamethrowers that saved American lives but burned Japanese soldiers alive in their defensive positions. The helmets that couldn't stop bullets but were worn anyway because they represented hope. The sake bottles left as offerings by those who remember that the enemy was also human, was also someone's son, someone's brother, someone's father. The story of Iwo Jima is told and retold. The flag-raising photograph is reproduced endlessly. The Marine Corps memorializes its finest hour. And these things are right and proper. But beyond the bunkers, in the darkness where history still breathes, other stories wait. Stories of men who crawled through suffocating tunnels with flashlights and pistols to hunt an enemy that refused to die. Stories of holdouts who survived underground for 4 years rather than surrender. Stories of flamethrower operators who lived through their 5-minute life expectancy and came home to build families and communities. Stories of artifacts left behind, some recovered and returned to families, most still resting in volcanic soil. These are the forgotten stories, the untold stories, the stories that exist in the margins of the grand narrative. They deserve to be remembered too. Because every helmet left behind belonged to someone. Every letter undelivered was written by someone who hoped to see home again. Every weapon abandoned was carried by someone who believed in something larger than himself. On that tiny island in the Pacific, where black volcanic sand meets gray Pacific waters, where Mount Suribachi stands sentinel over beaches that once ran red with blood, the weight of history presses down, 20 meters down, into tunnels where artificial light hasn't penetrated in decades, where the air is thick with sulfur and memory, where the dead rest undisturbed, in the earth they fought so hard to hold or to take. Let them rest, but let us also remember, not just the famous photograph, not just the iconic battle, but the men in the tunnels, the gear left behind, the stories that were never told, or were told but not heard, or were heard but not recorded. Let us remember that history is made not just on the surface, where cameras capture moments and generals plan strategies, but also in the darkness, where individual human beings face impossible choices and find within themselves reserves of courage they didn't know they possessed.
Let us remember that Iwo Jima was more than a battle. It was a crucible, a test of will and endurance, a place where the best and worst of humanity met in volcanic rock and underground fortresses. And let us remember that the artifacts left behind, the rusted rifles and rotted uniforms, the helmets and canteens and sake bottles, the letters and photographs and personal effects, these aren't just objects. They're evidence. Evidence that human beings were here, that they struggled and fought and died, that they loved their countries and feared death and hoped to survive, that they were, all of them, on both sides, human. Beyond the bunkers of Iwo Jima, in darkness that swallows light and memory, that evidence remains, waiting, bearing witness, telling stories to anyone willing to listen. This has been their story. If you found this journey into history meaningful, please subscribe to ArchiveBound for more untold stories from the archives of war. Your support helps us continue bringing these forgotten voices to light. Thanks for watching.